When it comes to being a resident, there's a plethora of resources for attaining clinical knowledge. But what about when it comes to life outside of the hospital? Well, that's where we come in. We're going to hear from alumni about their experiences during residency and hopefully make life a little bit easier for the rest of us. This is The Long White Coat. On the last episode of The Long White Coat, we began our discussion on parenting in residency, and we got to talk with Dr. Ravan Samakia. However, we also talked with Dr. Eunice Park for that discussion, but there was so much good information from the both of them that we had to divide the discussion into 2 episodes. So without further ado, here is our continuation on the discussion of parenting in residency. So next up on the podcast, we have Eunice Park.
Hi, my name is Eunice. I am an internal medicine resident, PGY3 at Loma Linda Internal Medicine Program.
And we want to welcome you here to the podcast. And let's just jump right into the questions then. So to start, how old was your kid when you started residency?
Okay, hold on. Let me calculate this for a second. Ava she was going to be about 2 years old.
So starting at 2 years old, kind of take me through the journey you went through at the beginning of residency to find childcare for her.
So I guess my story is a little bit different in that I had Ava at the end of 3rd year, or almost at the end of 3rd year. I took my psychiatry rotation. She was a planned C-section because she was breech. What I ended up doing was I took my psychiatry test and then I walked out and went to the hospital to have a C-section. And the reason I did that is because my mom was like, well, it's difficult now while she's inside of you, but it's going to be a lot worse when she comes out. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, and true, like my mom's words turned out to be absolutely true. I ended up taking a 4-week break just to focus on her. And then I went straight back into my neuro rotation to finish off my 3rd year. And then I, went into my 4th year. And I had made the decision beforehand to split my 4th year into 2 years so I could have some more bonding time with her, because I knew when residency came, it would be very challenging to spend adequate time. And so when I went to the School of Medicine office and I talked to them about full-time, part-time, they said that, because of my loans, they said I had to be at least part-time for it, or half-time for it not to kick in and start going back into repayment. And so the way to do that, they said, is every no more than 6 weeks, I would have to have at least a 2-week rotation. So because of how spotty the childcare situation was, like I would need someone every 4 or 6 weeks for 2 weeks at a time only, I couldn't really put her into daycare. And then the added difficulty was I actually lived in Temecula and was commuting up to Loma Linda. And the reason was because my husband was working in San Diego. And so he would go an hour south, I would go an hour north. And so I couldn't really find a daycare close to where I was going to school because I would sometimes be at different hospitals. I would have to go in super early, come out super late, and there's no real daycare accommodating that. So I couldn't have her actually in a daycare close to home, because then by the time I get out and drive down, it'd be over an hour later. And it would not make any sense. So what we ended up doing was I would schedule a 2-week rotation every 4 weeks. And then we actually flew out someone either from his family or my family from the East Coast to watch her while I did 2 weeks of rotations. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, they would fly back out. And then I would watch her again for 4 weeks. And then we just kept doing this until I finished med school. There are a lot of challenges with that because my daughter actually, she was breastfed and she didn't want to feed from a bottle. She only wanted to be breastfed. So even though I'd be pumping, like it wouldn't be used at home. And when I was on my sub-I for medicine, I couldn't break that up into 2 weeks and 2 weeks. It had to be 4 weeks straight. So what ended up happening was, because she refused to eat unless she was breastfed, she would, like literally starve herself all day long until I came home. My mom, who's watching her, was really concerned, and so she ended up actually driving up to me during my lunch hour, and I would hop out really quickly, breastfeed her in the car, and then hop back out and go back to my sub-I. So it was very challenging. After a while, she got old enough to be left with the babysitter, and during the last part of my 4th year, I was actually driving her up to a babysitter up in Highland, and so I was on the road an hour and 45 minutes one way every day. It was very challenging finding adequate childcare, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for kind of going into what it was like raising the kid, especially from a mom's perspective, because, or at least from talking with Ravon earlier, of course, we don't have the perspective of a mom having to breastfeed, and especially the challenge of if the baby isn't taking the bottle or anything like that. So thank you for that perspective. So then moving into residency, because we know that the medical school was able to kind of work around your schedule. What was it like with childcare moving into residency then?
We had to find something a bit more sustainable. The good news is that we moved a little bit closer, so I live in Riverside, but we ended up moving out his parents from Maryland to very close to us, and that has been a huge, huge blessing because they take very good care of her. I know she's fed, they're watching her, they're playing with her, and she's been able to thrive since they've been here. So I'm really grateful for my in-laws. Honestly, I think that without family structure or some solid support system, it's basically impossible. Almost impossible.
Yeah, that's very nice that family is willing to help out there. Was there any point where you guys were considering like paying for any kind of daycare situation or anything like that or not?
Yeah, she was in daycare for a brief amount of time and unfortunately got kicked out because she was crying too much. So, but the challenge was being able to pick her up and drop her off at the right times because the earliest daycare opens at like 6, and sometimes I need to be in the hospital before then. Because my husband works during COVID, he was able to work from home, which is great, but normally he would have to drive all the way down. It just wasn't feasible for us to find a daycare because there's no one who's going to be open that early, and then also very late. Sometimes you get out at like 9 p.m. Sometimes you have a night shift. It's just so erratic, and so I think in a situation where both, or at least one, spouse is able to, pick up the child a bit more regularly, it's daycare is a good option. But for us, because our hours were so erratic, it was very challenging.
And then something you started to touch on, has there been any challenges in like having to reprioritize finances or anything like that with your kid?
When a kid comes along, suddenly you're finding money where you didn't think it was possible. I kind of joked with my husband, I wish that we could have figured out how to work our money like this before we had her, and we could have done so many other things. But just magically somehow, right? You have to have money for a babysitter, and so you just like make it work. For us, my husband, he's an engineer, so he brings home a pretty good paycheck. One of the challenges was supporting his parents too, as they are watching our daughter. We did have to sit down and kind of think about that a bit, figure out how much. I think it's challenging because in residency, you have a lot of different financial obligations. You have student loans, right? This is the first time many of us are making money. And so we're trying to figure out how to lay the foundation for investments and retirement accounts and stuff like that. We're getting to it very late, but you do what you have to do, right? Raising a kid.
So, one of the questions that we had from one of the listeners is with your residency schedule being so tight, having very little free time, how have you optimized spending time with your kid and bonding with them, growing as a family, things like that?
So I think it's a work in progress, honestly. You're never going to feel like you've perfected it. And I think as a mom, especially, you just have tremendous guilt no matter what. So you just have to accept that. When I get home, I try to really just make home time as home time. Before, I was trying to do a lot of things like studying and things like that. And then I just realized when I get home in the evenings, it's just not. I'm not going to be productive anyway. So I might as well put all that aside. Try to do the studying either before everyone wakes up or after everyone goes to bed. Now that she's older, she really wants me to play with her all the time. I have to be really cognizant of that. And then also using other times like cooking time, shopping time, and just trying to include her more in those things. Those are also times to really bond as well. But no way, I don't think anyone can ever feel like they've done a good job. You always feel like I could have done more.
Yeah, that's definitely a great perspective in trying to integrate them into your schedule, at least when they're old enough. And now looking back on everything that you've accomplished as a parent thus far, is there anything that you would do differently in how you raise your kid during residency or medical school?
Sometimes I sit here and I wonder, well, if I had just powered through it and gone through residency, and I'd be out a year earlier and graduated with the rest of my class. I mean, I guess I have some regrets like with that, but I always think back like, no, but I needed that time with my kid. So I'm really glad I was able to have that time because I totally wouldn't have had it in residency. And I think I would have missed out on so many things with my daughter. So I think it was worth it.
I'm glad. That's great to hear. Especially in medicine, we get so focused on making it to the end at all costs. But definitely when it comes to kids, they should take some kind of priority in that decision making, I'm sure. So I'm glad you got to spend a lot of time with your kid, especially in those formative years early on. And then another question, in looking back on everything, were there any unforeseen challenges?
I was not expecting my daughter to be so exhausting. So everyone talks about like how tiring it is to have kids, and I feel like I have a pretty high tolerance for like working hard and like, just powering through. And even I felt like I got smacked into a wall just with how overwhelming parenthood was. And, coming with the medical background, having three younger siblings, I thought like I was like set. I was like, yeah, I know how to change diapers, I know how to do all this. I know about little bodies, little kids. But no, I didn't know anything. um, I didn't realize until I went through how important it is to have a social support system. It is so important, especially for the moms. I had a bit of postpartum blues and again, wasn't expecting it. I remember like the first 2 weeks after giving birth, I would just like look outside and just start being very teary and I'm like, I don't know even know why. It's not even that serious and the sheer feeling overwhelmed constantly. So, I just was not prepared for that. There's one thing I could say to anyone planning a kid. If your family is going to be of any help to you, I would utilize them. If you have to move closer to them and there's no real objection to it, or if family is not an option, you need to have a really, really good plan for childcare because the last thing you want to do is to be stressed out while you're on some really hard rotation and wondering what is happening to my kid as you're getting slammed with admits or coding somebody and your phone is like going off because your caretaker's like, oh, what do I do. So you just don't want to stress. But yeah, I just completely underestimated how challenging it would be to be a brand new parent.
Yeah, I've heard from one of my attendings that I've worked with that compared to all of medical school and residency, that raising a kid took the most out of them. And that, if anything, going to work was like a moment of respite for them compared to having to raise their kid. Not that they didn't enjoy it, but yeah, just the kind of energy toll it takes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I would also say I think for new moms, they should have a lot of grace for themselves because I think, looking through social media, everyone like acts super excited about their first child and like they think there's going to be instant bonding and for some that's just not the case. Like my daughter, as soon as she was pulled out, she was screaming and she didn't stop for like the first 2 nights. And I just like I got like 20 minutes to sleep the first 2 nights. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I'm so horrified. How am I gonna do this? I'm just gonna be completely honest. It wasn't until about a year in, she's gotten like chubbier, cuter, more interactive. and sleeping more through the night, that I was like, yes, I can finally understand, you know, what this joy of motherhood is like. But before that, it just felt like I just need to press forward and endure. And I mean, I loved my kid, I loved my baby, but sometimes I felt like I was leaning more into the action of love than the feeling of love, especially in the beginning of her being born.
I don't know what to say to respond to that in the podcast. Just wow. Any last words of advice for anyone that's considering becoming a parent or is a brand new parent that's entering residency?
I think if you're considering, you should really think about this almost methodically about like schedule. Think about, if especially if you're a woman, I guess I'll speak more to the women out there because I don't know what it's like to be a dad. For the women, right? Like you have to consider, are you going to be able to like function well while being pregnant, right? Because your body is going to do weird things. Like I remember when I was beginning of pregnancy, I was on peds and having a stethoscope just hanging around my neck was exhausting. Like I couldn't do it. And it was so surprising to me. And just little things like that, right? Like, are you going to be able to power through morning sickness if you're on nights, right? And sometimes you get surprised with a new blessing, right? So it's not like something you could really plan. But if you have the luxury of planning, I think you should really seriously think about it. I personally thought it was much better that I had my child when I was in med school because I think from then on it just gets harder and harder. So really plan and think about like and pray about when is the best time, right? Including childcare. It's not just about the emotions of having a baby. You really have to support this kid once it comes out. When you're in residency, I would say just do the best that you can and don't let the guilt make you lose out on your moments, right? Because like it's so easy to get bogged down with guilt, like, oh, I should have done better here. I should have done better last month. And then you're sitting there stewing and you're missing out on your current moment that you could be having with your child. And one thing I've noticed is your child really, really, really wants to be with you. They don't know that you feel like you're not doing enough. They're always happy to see you. They're always happy to have you. They're gonna miss you, right? And they're gonna want to be with you. So even if you feel like you're not doing a good job, just being able to show up is the best that you could do.
Wow. I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Park.
You're
Um,
gonna get inspired, right, Richard, for
yes,
for
I'm
your baby coming
inspired.
up.
Yes, I'm not even married, but I am ready to have a kid. Um, we want to thank you for those words of wisdom, Dr. Parks. We wish you the best in completing your residency now and wherever you're going next.
I'm doing a chief year at Riverside, part of the Loma Linda program still, and then I'm actually applying to pulmonary critical care. Yeah, debate of, balancing life, being a mom, going into this intense field fellowship. Do I even know? No, I don't, but I'm just gonna trust God in this process and move ahead. So
Amen. Definitely. Well, wherever you end up going, we wish you the best and we want to thank you for being on the podcast today.
thank you for having me.
That concludes today's episode of The Long White Coat. This is a production of the Alumni Association of Loma Linda School of Medicine. Our guest today was Eunice Park. If you found today's discussion helpful, please share with a friend and subscribe. I'm your host, Richard Ulangca, class of 2021. Thanks for listening and best wishes.